Shavua Tov, these parshas, Tazria and Metzora, deal with ritual impurity and tzarat, but what do they really deal with? Education. I believe there are two types. One is short-term, important, but only temporary, and one is permanent. To what do I refer? Well, let's go into it starting with the beginning of the parsha. We have the Yoledet, the woman who gives birth, she's ritually impure and so forth, and the Torah almost parenthetically mentions that if she has a boy, he will have a circumcision on the eighth day. Very nice. Why is it mentioned incidentally? The main mention of this commandment is in actually the book of Genesis by Abraham. That's interesting. We don't have a lot of mitzvot in the book of Genesis. I can think of that one. I can think of the prohibition of the sciatic nerve. So why is circumcision in the book of Genesis as its main mention? That's an interesting question. And then a halachic question comes up. What happens if the eighth day comes out on the Sabbath? Do we do the circumcision and supersede the Sabbath? Or do we say, no, wait till Sunday? The answer is we do a circumcision on the Sabbath. Why does circumcision supersede the Sabbath? Because, say the rabbis, it's an oath, it's a sign, and there are other interpretations as well, but an explanation is that it's a sign, and the Sabbath is a sign as well. The Sabbath is oti, it's a sign between Israel and God, and the sign of the circumcision is stronger than the sign of Shabbat, and therefore it takes precedence over the Shabbat. However, we have another commandment which is also a sign, tefillin. The phylacteries put on the arm and the head, they are also called in the Torah ot al yadcha, a sign on your hands. And yet tefillin are not worn on Shabbat. Not only are they not required, they're not allowed to be worn. Why? Because it's considered as a insult to the Shabbat to wear the tefillin. Shabbat is a sign. It's a sufficient sign. If you bring in the tefillin, it's as if you're saying that Shabbat isn't strong enough. So how come Brit Milah then, which is also a sign, is stronger? What makes it stronger than the other two? It's because there are two types of education. There's education which is external, about deeds and actions, and then there is education which is internal, a change in one's essence, in one's character, in one's spirit. Let's take a look and see where this can be seen more clearly. The tzara'at. What is tzara'at? A skin disease of some sort, but it is not treated as a disease, it is treated as an impurity. The person who has tzara'at must be brought not to the doctor, but to the kohen, who then will send them into quarantine. I don't know if you ever heard that word before, pending their healing from that tzara'at. And the rabbis, of course, connect tzara'at to sins. It's a punishment. Usually for Lashon Hara, evil speech. Miriam spoke about Moshe and she got tzara'at, she got leprosy, so there's that connection. At any rate, the Torah tells us an interesting word. Vehuva, he shall be brought to the Kohen. If a person sees these discolorations on their skin, we might think that they would run to the doctor. Well, no. They need to be pushed to the Kohen. Vehuva, they have to be brought to the Kohen, implying they don't want to go. They have to be forced to go. Why so? Well, the great Rabbi Dr. Avraham Twersky explains that an alcoholic will not tell you that they are an alcoholic. They will say, I can control my drinking, I can stop whenever I want. And the family and friends, they know that that's not so. They know that this person has a problem, and they will very often mount an intervention and push the person into some kind of recovery program. So to here, the person is denying that he has tzara'at. No, it's just something, whatever, but it's there, and it's obvious, and so they need to be pushed to be treated. Okay, but that part makes sense. But then, after the tzara'at has healed, then the person has to bring a sacrifice. And the Torah uses the same word there, vehuva, they shall be brought, implying that they're not running to bring the sacrifice. I'd think, hey, he'd be so thrilled that tzara'at is gone, yay, I'm going to run and bring the sacrifice. No, they have to be pushed. Why so? Because this is external education. Tzara'at is an external educational experience. And as soon as the tzara'at is over, as soon as the alcoholic graduates from AA and hasn't had a drink in a month, he says to himself, I can maybe have a little bit. I can start drinking a little bit. I'm okay now. I can control it now. Right. The tzarua also says, okay, I'm now healed. Great. Let me just go back to what I was. Don't bother me. I don't need to bring a sacrifice. I don't need to do anything. But no, we need to push him to bring the sacrifice. Why so? Well, first of all, external education is temporary. And therefore, as soon as his tzaraat is gone, it's easy enough for him to slip back into his old ways. But also there's a significance to the sacrifice, because a sacrifice brings about a more permanent change. The great Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik was, I'm going off onto a tangent and then we'll come right back. He asked a very powerful question about one of the strange laws that shows up in the Talmud. Background. If a person wishes to divorce their wife, they have to give the get willingly. They cannot give the get under duress. And you have situations when a person does not wish to give a get to their estranged wife. A get is a bill of divorce. And so the Beit Din can force them, but not to give the get, but the Beit Din can force them to say, I want to give the get, and then they give the get. In other words, Kofin Oto Ad Sheyomar Otseani. We force him until he says, I want to do it. How can that be? Even though he's now saying, I want to do it, he doesn't really want to do it, does he? I just want you to stop beating me up. Or whatever the Beit Din is doing to force him to do it. He doesn't really want to give the get, does he? Says the Rambam, he does. He does. Why? Because a person deep down in their soul wants to do what is right, wants to do what the Torah demands of them. And it's just that they get covered over, as it were, by earthly, worldly things and emotions and all kinds of other distractions, which may push them to behave, pressures that force them to behave in a way that is antithetical to the rules of the Torah. If you can clear away all of those coverings and uncover the pure soul, again, the person really wants to do the right thing. And therefore, the Rambam says, when the Beit Din forces him, they are just helping him uncover his true essence, which wants to do what the Torah wants him to do. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says we see a little proof for this from our story of Tzarat, because twice in the book of Leviticus, we have a stress on the word Adam, a man. The first one at the beginning is Adam ki yakrif mikem korban, a man who amongst you, from you, brings a sacrifice. It's talking about a korban. And in this week's parsha, Adam ki hiye be'or b'sarot tzarat, a man who has in the skin of his flesh tzarat, this leprosy-like disease. So the Rav says there's a difference, a very subtle but an important difference in the phrasing. Because in the case of the sacrifice, the word that is used is mikem, from you, meaning from your midst, from your essence. The act of bringing a sacrifice in the temple is so spiritually powerful that it changes a person's very character. It is not education for actions, but rather education for the soul, for the spirit, for the internal essence. But the phrasing in the case of the Tzarat is Adam, in a man who shall have this in the skin of his flesh. It doesn't say a man who has in himself. It doesn't say Adam ki yeh bo Tzarat. It says be'or b'saro Tzarat, in the skin of his flesh. In other words, it is all an external thing. And so we see that the sacrifice has a much more potent effect. So therefore, at the very end, after he is no longer impure, that's when he has to be pushed to bring a sacrifice to make that change permanent, to make the change one that will now affect his character forevermore. He won't go back to his bad ways. And so now we can understand the question about Brit Milah. First of all, why is Brit Milah in the book of Genesis? Because this is education. Brit Milah is all about education. It's Avraham being the father of the nation and giving the legacy to his descendants to carry forward. Therefore, Brit Milah symbolizes that. And that is a permanent change. How is it a permanent change? Because the body changes. A Brit Milah is a permanent change in the person's anatomy, as it were. And that is a stronger sign. You see, tefillin and Shabbat are education through deeds. Tefillin is putting the tefillin on the arm and on the head to subjugate the emotions, to subjugate the thoughts. And that is a subjugation of actions. As long as the tefillin are there, the person will behave properly. But when they take off the tefillin, there's no guarantees. It's like conquest. Conquest brings about a change. And the rabbis talk about the land of Israel being sanctified by conquest in the time of Joshua. That conquest brought sanctity that was temporary. We conquered cities that already existed from others. And later on, when others would take those cities from us, the Babylonians specifically, the sanctity would lapse. So that is like tefillin, and even Shabbat, which is the number 7, the 7th day. 7 symbolizes actions. This is the world of Asiya. So the Sabbath, we refrain from actions, but it is still a education to action, to rest, as it were. So both Shabbat and tefillin are signs of external education, and Shabbat is stronger because Shabbat is completely immersive. Tefillin is on the arm and the head. Shabbat is completely immersive. So if I were to wear tefillin on Shabbat, it would be as if I'm saying that the sign of Shabbat is a little weaker. It needs a little reinforcement, and that's an insult to the Shabbat, so therefore it's not allowed. However, once you pass 7, you get to 8. 8 is already a change in essence that is permanent, that is eternal. And that is the Brit Milah. And that is therefore a far stronger sign than the Shabbat. And that is why Brit Milah supersedes the Shabbat. And that is why the second sanctity of the land of Israel, which was brought about through internal change. Jews came back from Babylonia, and instead of conquering, they started building. Just like in our century, they started building yishuvim and kibbutzim and towns and areas. And it became from within a land of our people. And since it became from within, that is a change that is permanent. So we have 2 types of education. Education to actions and deeds, which is important, but that won't last forever. What is most important is education to character, to improve our inner essence, our spiritual essence, like the sacrifices would accomplish. And the more we can focus on that kind of education to everybody to whom we educate, including ourselves, then those changes will be blessed and will be permanent, just like we had 7 weeks leaving Egypt to improve our actions in this world, and that led us up to what happened after the 7 weeks were over. We received the Torah, the heavens opened, and again we became changed, and the world became changed permanently for the better. Shavua Tov.